Hello, and welcome back to the Diogenes podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Willingham, and together we will chew our way through Wokistan in search of an honest man, or woman, or they, them. I'm just kidding. There's nothing honest about any of that. Remember, if you enjoy the content on the Diogenes podcast, please like and subscribe and tell your friends to join the pack. There will be many more treats to come as this channel expands its territory. Today, we'll return to my essay entitled Danse Macabre, picking up where we left off last time in Part 1, Thanatopolitics, and continuing forward through Part 2, entitled Strategic Silence and Fashionable Denunciationism. I've offered my working definitions of death and cult. Now for the left. Historically, leftism was a seating arrangement. Now it's a priapic condition. Look it up. Way up. What began as a parliamentary division between socialists and the aristocracy during the French Revolution has become a rigid posture of permanent revolt, with the goal of endless social renorming and unnorming with no stable, sustainable alternatives proposed. Critical responses to this demolition are usually met with the no true Scotsman fallacy. Real socialism has never been tried. Leftism is always pursued with the stated goal of extending previously withheld rights to the common people and expanding social welfare, which presumably lead to a more broadly egalitarian state. What is never accounted for is how cries for liberté, égalité, fraternité lead to the reign of terror that extends from the river to the sea. Liberalism shares the concern for the rights and liberties of individuals and the possibility of state overreach, but here the similarities end. The Encyclopedia Britannica defines liberalism as, quote, the culmination of developments in Western society that produced a sense of the importance of human individuality, a liberation of the individual from complete subservience to the group, and a relaxation of the tight hold of custom, law, and authority. In this respect, liberalism stands for the emancipation of the individual, end quote. Indeed. But the emancipation of the individual does not entail, nor can it tolerate, the abolition of a normative order, whether political or epistemological. Nor does it obviate the commitment to a common set of values embodied in cultural institutions. The description goes on to note that adversary procedure in the form of electoral contests and market economy are crucial features of liberalism, as they are designed as a check against potential state tyranny and as a grant for the independent pursuit of individual well-being and prosperity. This procedural contestation, built in as an essential feature of democracy, overthrew a view of state authority and class roles that had obtained in the West since Plato, and had no equivalent in any other cultural milieu up to that time, and here I mean the Western Enlightenment. It was designed with the expressed purpose of creating a dynamic social order, one predicated on the conviction that, quote, human beings are essentially rational creatures capable of settling their political disputes through dialogue and compromise, end quote. Very sadly, as we shall see, this precept, a unique and monumental contribution from the Western Enlightenment to the moral and material advancement of the entire world, has become anathema to the American left. The philosopher of science Karl Popper defined an open society as one in which citizens are free to think, speak, and act according to individual conscience, and institutions are structured to tolerate criticism and to improve through established and peaceful means of error correction. Societies which fail at this inexorably drift toward authoritarianism. In his work, The Open Society and Its Enemies, Popper called this the paradox of tolerance, holding that, quote, unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them, end quote. It is incontrovertible that the West has reached the tipping point in the transition from openness to authoritarian renorming. This has been occurring by degrees for decades as a direct result of the suicidal empathy of the left and their pathological obsession with sacralized groups, power arrangements, and institutional control. Recent data show that leftist violence is at a 30-year high, and the cultural hegemony of the woke has long been weaponized to stamp out competing ideas and to dehumanize their opposition. Manipulated data, disinformation campaigns by mainstream media, and outright lies by politicians and pundits have gaslit the American public about the real sources of escalating violence and cultural upheaval. This loss of recognition and fellow feeling, the dissipation of reason, the conflation of identities with ideas and policies with personalities, and the historical amnesia of the left are symptoms of political senility. This was pathetically embodied by the Democrats propping up a pre-embalmed, non-compos mentis incumbent in the 2024 presidential election, and then swapping him out for a box-checking avatar whose inebriated baffle-gab and cackling code switching were even more incoherent. This is the long goodbye. This is the slow death of democracy. Part 2. Strategic Silence and Fashionable Denunciationism. We may have the most inarticulate generation of college students in our history, and this may well account for their mass outbreaks of violence. They have no more intelligent way to express themselves. Carl Shapiro, Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, 1945, speaking in 1970. Popper's paradox of tolerance can be seen in two related operations characteristic of leftist-dominated cultural institutions, specifically academia and the news media. I refer to these as strategic silence and fashionable denunciationism. Strategic silence simply is refuting the truth of events that challenge the leftist narrative, minimizing or qualifying their significance, memory holding them when deemed necessary, or selectively choosing not to communicate them at all. This phenomenon alone is sufficient to make the case that the left continue to dominate discourse and define reality. They control the mainstream truth-seeking and sense-making institutions through curation and curriculum, policy, and propaganda. We see what they want us to see, and we hear what they want us to hear. And as with all authoritarians, what they are not talking about or allowing to be said is crucial to understanding their machinations. Fashionable denunciationism is also a tactic common to all authoritarian regimes and consists in identifying individuals as enemies of a given ideological narrative, harassing them, imperiling their livelihoods, deplatforming them, and increasingly among American leftists, eliminating them altogether, often to the rapturous delight of online trolls. This tactic scales up to include institutional practices which woke leftists, in their own words, urgently seek to disrupt and dismantle. These subversive deconstructions include everything from TV commercials, films, and literature to police departments' patriarchy and the so-called gender binary, clarity on which is challenging as the left's definition of woman remains strangely fuzzy and not in a warm way. Together, these strategies partake of and perpetuate perverse incentives to control our informational diet, leading to the inculcation of brain rot ideology. This is a process of manipulation that emerges organically from the gibbering mouthers of amorphous online media, but is also stirred in specific directions by those who seek social, political, and monetary credits by gaming the system to their ideological advantage. Outrage used to be an emotion. Now it's a job description. Quillette founder and editor Claire Lehman defines online brain rot as, quote, the sense that one's emotional capacities and responsiveness have deteriorated under a constant diet of frenetic, low-quality content. The effect is easiest to see in the online subcultures that prize in-jokes and exclusion, end quote. Chaos is the point, she notes, and the consequences are evident, especially in the decline of academic performance and the withering mental health of young people. Online life becomes a quick and easy substitute for maturity and mastery, one in which meme recognition and fluency in the argot confer status and instant validation. Lehman's argument identifies online brain rot as a factor independent of ideology in influencing the self-destructive behaviors and the acceptance of radical violence increasing among Gen Z. While I take her point that ideology is in some way downstream from the emotional pathology served and stimulated by the darker elements of online feeds, I think this is a distinction without a difference. This is a bidirectional pathology. It doesn't matter if ideologically captured youth log on to confirm and spread their biases, or if a more general outrage is stoked in the credulous by algorithmic inanity. The medium is the message, and the message is that extremism has been democratized, or more accurately, socialized. Get in line now to receive your free share today, pronouns not included. Best to make some up on your own. The anxious generation, as social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has dubbed it, may in fact be more directly motivated by personal needs, but the most desperate are satisfying those needs in destructive political outbursts and receiving the validation they crave at the cost of their own and others' lives. The precedent has been set, and there is no retreating outside this ideological matrix. Online life, like ideologies, includes its exits within itself. This is how cults operate. And it's yet another example of how an entropic leftist discourse has spread like a virus through the broader culture. This is by design in academia and by government mandate in social media. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and former CEO of YouTube Susan Wojcicki have acknowledged that they bent to pressure from the Biden administration to censor and remove content on their platforms that did not accord with the leftist narratives concerning COVID, much of this content having since been proven accurate. The Twitter files exposed by journalist Matt Taibbi and writer Michael Schellenberger reveal conclusively how U.S. intelligence agencies leaned on legacy media to suppress coverage of the Hunter Biden laptop story, which, according to a New York Times poll, may have affected the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. Further concrete proof of media manipulation has been brought to light by the exposure of the BBC in manipulating Trump's message to protesters on January 6th. Widely disseminated by leftist news outlets as a coup, footage from the BBC has been revealed to be heavily edited to provoke a false impression of stochastic violence. The full transcript of the Stop the Steal address shows 60-minute gaps between parts of Trump's statements selectively edited to create the appearance of rage baiting as an accelerant to insurrection. Contra Gil Scott-Heron, this revolution has been televised and reconfigured for your ideological confusion. This exposed journalism of deception has led to an external advisor to the BBC's Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee professing profound and unresolved concerns about the BBC, quote, specifically in relation to the corporation's coverage of the 2020 U.S. presidential election, issues of race and gender, and the Israel-Gaza war, end quote. If it happened there, it can happen here. Something we all should be very alarmed about, considering the censorship and thought crime incarcerations happening in the UK and Europe over issues of race, immigration, sexual predation on women, and the preservation of Western cultural values. Meanwhile, illegal outsiders are living rent-free on the taxpayer's dime and getting away with murder. Ultimately, Lehman concludes, this is a spiritual crisis. Young people are searching for belonging, intimacy, initiation in an overstimulated world that has thinned the sense of self in a Sisyphean repetition of endless shitposting. But we must wonder where they would ever find the meaning they crave and deserve to make in a world in which everything is tribally politicized and identities are defined by what they oppose and negate. This is still another example of leftist nihilism. It's not what one stands for, but who one puts down that matters. There are two people recently put down whose lives count to a degree that may determine the fate of our democracy. Again, I'm making an extraordinary claim, but the significance of what these individuals represent, beyond the unique and precious lives lost, and the hateful response that has followed their deaths, indicate that we have taken a definitive step across the Rubicon dividing liberal democracy from authoritarian pathocracy. America has forgotten Abraham Lincoln's admonition that, quote, to correct the evils great and small that spring from want of sympathy as nations or as individuals is one of the highest goals of civilization, end quote. And the ominous warning of historian Arnold Toynbee that, quote, civilizations die by suicide, not by murder, end quote. The left would do well to remember in this era of manufactured contempt that the lives we save may be our own. Send not to know for whom the bell tolls. But alas, the execution of Iryna Zarutska and the assassination of Charlie Kirk stand as shocking and shameful examples of the strategic silence and the fashionable denunciationism of the woke left. I submit that, contra pauper, this is no paradox. Tolerance is simply not part of the left authoritarian program. Why? Because the American left is a death cult.